All right, 1, 2, 3.
This is the important one. All right, here we go.
Welcome to the Hackaday podcast. I'm Elliot Williams, editor-in-chief of Hackaday.
And I'm Tom Nardi, managing editor at Hackaday.
This is episode 185. This week we'll be looking at a 2022 Rotary phone, how AI imagines Zepplin, and are we alone in the universe? In the news this week, the chip shortage is not just hurting us hackers, it's also hurting apparently the Russian military, or at least according to this article from Politico that includes a spreadsheet where they're looking for particular chips, and a bunch of specific connectors was actually the coolest thing I thought was on the spreadsheet. I imagine if you've designed tanks or hypersonic missiles or whatever the hell, and you have specific connectors in there, if you can't get them, that's kind of a bummer.
Yeah, I mean, this has got to be unprecedented, right? That we have this kind of insight into a foreign power's military infrastructure and like to the part number, what they need, and you know, even there's like a priority thing on there where it's like, you know, we must have these and these other ones, and you know, we could probably replace it with something else. This is the reason that you know, like in the U.S., they're so cautious about using foreign components in like jet fighters and stuff like that, because this is the situation you can find yourself in if things get hot and other countries won't give you the parts that you need for your weapons. Suddenly, your military is kind of ineffectual.
This has always been the way wars kind of go, though. I mean, this is like just the modern version of blockading the straits so that they can't get gas in or whatever, right? Like it's the same old prevent them from getting access to the resources they need. It's just the like high tech version.
Yeah, this is like having holding a castle siege, right? But with microchips.
I have to say I'm a tiny bit skeptical here. They do say, this is reported in Politico, and they do say that they couldn't independently verify the provenance of the list. They've asked some people if it looks about right, and they've said, yeah, it looks about right, but I don't know what that means. And then somewhere in the story, I do have to say, they have someone repeating the scavenging parts out of washing machines routine in this very story, which I guess we've heard a couple times before and have tried to get a source for. And I mean, we know people who've said that they've heard of people doing it, but that's like hearsay. That's inadmissible in court. Have yet to see anyone come up with the actual source. I have to say that to see the scrounging chips come out of washing machines come up for the Russian military makes my warning signs go off.
But you're right. It is a good point. Like, assuming this is legit, whoever leaked this is going to have a very bad time in Siberia when it gets found out that they are responsible. Because this has got to be, you know, very, very private information that they would really rather not the Western, you know, media know about.
If you read the comments, some people have looked at the prices of these chips on the open market and say they're tremendously cheaper if you can order them from, you know, a Western online part supplier. Wars are no good, but I'm glad that the chip shortage isn't just hitting me. Man, try to get a Raspberry Pi 4. Jeez.
Yeah, right. I was actually waiting for somebody in the comments to be like, oh, hey, I got one of those in my, you know, whatever that I'm working on. I'm sure there's something on this list that's not
$1,100.
Rare.
I'm selling.
Well, yeah, right. But some of this stuff seemed pretty common. I mean, it even goes all the way down to like, you know, passive components. Apparently, they're having trouble getting, you know, even just resistors and diodes, that kind of stuff. I mean, but yeah, this is kind of what happens when most of the world has a sanction against you.
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
All right. Well, it's time for What's That Sound? And this week, I think I've got a stumper.
Uh-oh. Glad to be here for it.
Give it a shot. Give it a shot.
Here we go. I'm going to listen now. Well, it's very musical.
Yeah, isn't it?
It's a public display of something musical. But what is making the music, I guess, is the key thing, right?
Yep.
I I couldn't even venture a guess. I will put something that's not supposed to be making that noise.
Good.
Something that's being forced into making a noise it's not supposed to. I think
Marvelous.
that's the closest I can get with the available information.
It's an incidental noise.
Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway, if you've got a guess at what this sound is, head on over to the show notes over at hackaday.com/podcast. Fill out the form you'll find there, enter your best guess, enter the handle you'd like to be called on the air, and if we pick your correct answer out of the hat, you will win a Hackaday podcast t-shirt. My first project this week comes from Nicholas Roy. Inexpensive reading glasses become stereoscope. And this is a super project. It's kind of one of those you have to see in person to understand how cool it is. And I was actually lucky enough a couple weekends ago to be up at Nicholas's studio up in Berlin with my son. And we actually made a pair of exactly these stereoscope glasses here. And it is fantastic. This is one you really have to try out. The main gimmick here, and what's really particularly cool about these, is that the optics in a stereoscope could be expensive, but Nicholas's idea is to get the super strong lens involved by buying two basically strong, cheap reading glasses and zip tying them back to make one super strong lens. And the rest of it is just a little bit of geometry. Print out two pictures, one for each eye. You get them separated the right distance from each other, and that distance is basically the same as the distance between your two pupils. So you're looking straight ahead. The glasses make it so that your eyes focus that close up and you look straight ahead, because when you think you're focusing at infinity, you tend to point your eyes straight ahead like something's far, far away instead of going kind of cross-eyed when it gets closer. Know what I mean? And the glasses do that for you, and you can print it out. The really cool thing, though, is that Nicholas has also added a bunch of software for manipulating 3D images, but you can also just take pictures and align them yourself. And we did that a bunch too. Just take a picture, move the camera over about 6.5 centimeters, couple inches, take another picture, and if your subject hasn't moved in that time, it's just like your own two eyes were looking at it. And when you align the images just right, print them out, put them in the stereoscope, it looks like you're actually looking at me or my son in 3D. So we had a really good time taking pictures, gluing them onto cardboard, and running them in this device.
Like you said, the design is pretty straightforward, but I think the real cool thing here is the parametric template generator, which I have been playing with the whole time you've been talking.
Yeah.
And it's really cool. It has the sliders where, because, if you're using these reading glasses, right, you got to take into account they're going to be different sizes. I guess there's juvenile ones and everything. So you put in all the parameters, like how big the glasses are and, how thick it is and how thick the cardboard is. And there's all these little sliders that you can move. And in real time, the cutouts are changing. It's super cool. I don't know if what framework this is done or if it's completely custom for them.
I think he wrote it himself.
Even if you weren't interested in making one of these things, just go on here and play with it. And, I like how, you could even say, I guess, how big you want the little photo card to be. It says with a stereograph. So, you can make it so it's this very, wedge shape, or it could even be wider on the outside than the glasses, which seems like that would be weird, but he knows better than me. It's just a really cool thing. Like you said, it's not super complicated that you could just kind of make this on your own, but this makes it so much easier and so much more accessible, and plus just fun. If you have a kid, if you're doing this at home or something, this is going to be a lot more interesting. I could tell you that my daughter would spend plenty of time just moving these things around and watching the models change.
He also has a joystick-driven plotter device that's called Vector Collector. The cool byproduct is that he stores the lines from Vector Collector and can then turn them into 3D art based on the order in which they were drawn. And there's a great visualizer over at vectorcollector.com/3D, links in the show notes, where it lets you play around with how offset the images are from each other and how much parallax and stuff like that. And if you can manage to go cross-eyed and combine the images together, or just, I guess actually Nicholas does it by, he has this great completely ghetto setup. I'll throw a picture in the show notes too, where he made essentially one of these 3D viewers, except instead of a place to slide the card in, it's got a hook that hooks over his laptop monitor. So you can actually view 3D images on the laptop to preview them, and then move these sliders back and forth to tweak like how far the apparent depth is and whether there's perspective applied and stuff like that. And that is actually super fun to play around with. So when I was a kid, I had an old stereoscope, stereopticon, they called them in the turn of the 1900s, that my grandfather gave me, with like all these like, you know, kitschy tourist photos of people visiting Niagara Falls in 1905. And they're really fun. And I remember looking at those for a while as a kid because, like the Viewmaster, I guess, these kind of apparent 3D images using like ancient tech were really, really cool. And I think that's part of what's super fun about this device too, is that it lets you use really simple tech. It's like a printed out piece of paper, you glue it onto cardboard, you cut that out, you salvage a couple pairs of reading glasses, and you're done. Super, super simple tech. The result is shocking, even though the tech involved is hyper minimal.
Well, this next project is one that I was very, very happy to see come back our way, as I'm sure a lot of the readers were. This is Justine Hopp's Rotary cell phone, which I think it was 2 years ago now, kind of took the internet by storm, because she took an actual rotary module from some, Western Electric phone and hooked it up with, I think at the time, like an Adafruit cell modem, and put it in this 3D printed case and made a honest working rotary cell phone. There's obviously a lot of huge novelty in that, right? But, when I see this, I also think like, there's so much promise in making custom open source cell phones, because it just, if you're not into the rotary module, just delete that and put a keypad in there, and basically all the parts are there. I'm happy to see that this one continued to develop and now is in a kit form that you can pre-order. I don't think they're available yet. In the last 2 years, a lot of changes have been made. She says in the video that effectively every part of the phone has been changed or got a little once over. Probably the part that will disappoint some people is that the rotary module has been replaced with all new components. I totally get from a production standpoint, right? Like, you're trying to put these things out as a kit and you can't exactly source these ancient Western Electric rotary modules forever. So, you had to kind of give that up. But it is really cool that they went through trouble of, designing a whole new one. There's a picture on there with all the, custom gears and everything that they had to do, which I'm sure was quite a bit of work in itself. There's now a little physical bell, like an actual bell that gets hit with a little hammer, like no expense spared to make this the true old school experience. Like, everything's changed. The 3D printed case is now injection molded. It comes in all these really cool retro colors that you could imagine, these old phones would have been in. And probably the biggest one is now has LTE support, because the last one was only a 3G modem, which has since been turned off, I think, on most carriers at this point. She clearly wants this to be as mainstream as possible. I think it did pick up a lot of attention in, like, outside of the normal hacker circles. Like, there was a lot of just general interest in this. So I thought one of the really cool details is that the kit itself doesn't require any soldering. She'd managed to engineer it to the point that everything that needed to be soldered is already pre-soldered, and then the rest is just little connectors and ZIF sockets and that kind of thing. I wouldn't necessarily give the kit to your grandmother, but you don't have to have like a reflow setup or something just to make this. Pretty much anyone who's marginally handy could put this together on their own, which I think has a lot of promise for getting this out of our circles. It was clearly going to be popular in our circles. That was never a question. But like, this is something that the average, not even necessarily like the nostalgia driven person, but maybe just like they're privacy minded and they don't like the idea of what the modern smartphone has become, and they literally just want to call people. You just want a phone? Yeah, just a phone. Just a phone. And I think the kit's not cheap. I want to say $400, $390. But I mean, what's a new iPhone cost? Honestly, it's not like it's insane money for a modern device, and one that you truly own, and everything that's going on in there, and it's not spying on you.
Yeah, and the kit itself is stunning. I mean, we have this picture. It's a long, wide picture in the middle of our write-up, and it's all the parts. And you can just look at that and tell that this is not the first version, and that this has been, revised and revised and refined and refined. Like, it's a kit of, look like nylon custom gears. The main circuit board is custom, and it's got this, like, U-Blox LTE module on it. But, like, everything is smooth curves and custom shapes so that it all fits together. That bell, the metal bell, has to fit in there somehow. Must have been an insane challenge to try to pack this all into such a tight, tiny, and good-looking case. This is like a serious product in a way. Like, all the parts are injection molded, all the parts are sourced and bagged for you. All the parts are kind of modern parts. I mean, it's not like, in contrast to what I do, whatever comes out of the junk bin. These are, each part has been carefully thought through and presumably is sourceable in reasonably large quantities, and the whole shebang. This is an incredible amount of effort, and it's just nice to see something so polished from the hardware side, and even from the software side, where dialing a rotary phone may not be the fastest thing anymore, but it's got like 9 pages of calls. So if it's like you've got old time speed dial, right? If you want to dial, you dial 1 and it brings up a menu, and then you dial another number and it dials an entry from that menu, which shows up actually in this version on a beautiful e-ink screen on the back. So like, you dial 1 and then you flip the phone over and it gives you your phone book with all the numbers that you can dial by dialing one more digit. So if you don't want to have the full /sucky dial all 10 digits out on a rotary phone experience, you could put them in your thing with a text file. The phone book is a text file on an SD card. You could just open it up on your computer, type the numbers in. Like, it's so just beautifully thought out. So really, really cool.
This may be the best, like, one-off project to kit that I've ever seen. Like you said, like, so much attention to detail went into it, to the point that she really had to rebuild the whole thing. Her original creation wasn't really suitable for mass production, so she had to look at every part and say, okay, well, I can't do that. What can I do? And it took an incredible amount of effort that we very rarely see, but I think it kind of speaks to just how much buzz this must have generated. I imagine she got a lot of contacts from a lot of people, enough that it was like, okay, let me like, who's designing a new rotary dialing mechanism in 2022? Like,
right?
you must have got a lot of calls from a lot of people that you're like, hey, let me sit down and figure out how to do this, because I need to sell these kits. And more power to her. I mean, that's amazing. If you can turn something you created into potentially your livelihood for that. I mean, that's like the TV be gone, right? It was like a little,
it's like living the dream.
A little joke thing, and all of a sudden, it became huge. So more power to it. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see more projects that we covered hit this kind of success.
My next hack is Ewald de Wit's Equalize Your Listening Experience with Hi-Fi Scan. This is basically a Python program that emits chirps at different frequencies, and then you record them with a microphone from where you want to be sitting. It notices which frequencies come out louder and which come out quieter, and it does the heavy math of calculating a finite impulse response filter that kind of equalizes the sound for you. Now, this is the super tricky way to equalize the sound, and if you're a DSP geek, the interesting thing here is that the filter structure that he's picked in particular makes sure that all of the transients get to you at the same time as they normally would, but it still, like, raises the bass and the treble like the tone controls on your hi-fi would. And what that means is that it sounds like coherent. Like, if you take a cymbal or something that makes a pretty wide range of noise, and then you turn up the highs on it with a lot of normal tone control like things, that actually delays the high frequency component a little bit relative to the low frequency component. And so you get this kind of almost, it's barely perceptible, but when you hear it back to back with the original, you can tell that the cymbals sound like better. And that's because the hit, when it's time aligned, the hit comes across straight at you, and when it's all skewed up, it doesn't. So this is doing the calculations to essentially equalize your audio in the perfect way, the like time consistent way. And that's really fantastic. Whether you like your sound to sound this way or not is another thing. And Evald mentions this on the write-up and says, for those who like neutrally balanced sound, there's a huge improvement. If you want your sound bassy and boomy, of course, this is going to undo that for you. So sucks to be you.
Personally, I don't have I guess the ear for this kind of stuff so much. I there's been times where my brother's really into this. He's got a whole proper setup. And I had, recorded something, and I was like, "Hey, can you listen to this?" And he just kind of looks at me and rolls his eyes, and he's like, "What did you do? What just let me do it over for you, because I don't know what the hell I'm doing." But this kind of democratizes that a little bit, so that even if you don't have the tuned ear, you can kind of run the software and see where you could be improved or where there's a problem, which I think is really cool.
I guess it's worth noting that something like this is only really as strong as the microphone you're using to record the samples with. So, it's playing through your speakers, so your speakers aren't perfect. They're, too trebly or too bassy. That'll come across as long as the microphone records flat across the range. And so part of the question is, can you get a good enough reference/measurement mic for that? And the answer these days is hell yeah. They used to cost $600 for a good studio reference mic, and now Dayton Audio has one, Behringer has one for $30 to $50. So you can actually get a kind of certified flat reference mic for 30 or $50. Use this open source software on top of that and completely optimize your room. And then you can pump that filter/EQ curve/whatever into some other piece of upstream DSP, and then you win. You have the super studio in your own home for extremely little money. The pinch point here is still that last bit, the running the finite impulse response filter on your stereo. And I think he's using a closed source tool for that. So he's generating the FIR filter with Python and this script included here, but then he's running it on something else just because it's significantly more convenient. And I think that's a cool invitation for somebody out there who likes to play around with DSP stuff to make a real-time FIR filter program that can do the playback for him as well. I don't know, it'd be a super awesome beginning introductory FPGA project, or you could probably do it with a really fast microcontroller like the Teensy 4. Ooh, this could be a really sweet hardware project to set the filter coefficients in there once, and you could have this device sitting in your audio chain, pre-emphasizing everything for you. When I retire, I will work on this project. Somebody please beat me to it.
Now, this next project actually came to us as a open access paper. Joshua Pierce sent this in. He wrote that with a couple peers. It starts out saying that 3D printed parts are amazing, which I think we can all agree with. And they have been very transformative in being able to construct low cost prototypes and scientific gadgets. But there are certain places where it just doesn't work, and one of those is a vacuum environment. You can put them in a vacuum, but if you're trying to make vacuum fittings and couplers and stuff like that, they can't handle it. The plastic is too porous. So their paper, Thermal Post-Processing of 3D Printed Polypropylene Parts for Vacuum Systems, talks about ways to post-process these parts. And originally they said, okay, well, maybe if we heat them in an oven, we can kind of effectively melt that outside layer of the part and solidify it. And the answer is that just turns them into goo, because they said every time they tried to put them in an oven, they got deformed. But the concept had promise. So they took a little bit of a low-tech approach and got, your traditional consumer heat gun that you might strip paint with, and they kind of hold the part at arm's length and just go at it for about a minute or so. And there's actually an interesting video linked to the paper where you can see the surface change. It goes from that lined 3D printed look to a glossier finish that reminded me originally of the ABS parts that were smooth with acetone vapor. Exactly. They take on this kind of outer candy-looking shell.
Yeah.
But once you see that, okay, that there's no more individual lines. They've been solidified, and they also play around with some slicer settings here, specifically like the overlap infill. So it's printing it almost as solid as it can get to begin with, and then they do this post processing. And the results were pretty phenomenal. They were able to get very, very low pressures without these things leaking. And they actually said that even if you because they did the slicer settings, treated and then untreated. And they said even the ones that weren't treated with the heat actually did pretty well, which sort of speaks to, I guess where the state of the art in desktop 3D printing is right now. They said if you tell your slicer to make it as solid as possible, it does do a decent job. But then when they heat treated them, they were able to almost double their performance, which was pretty considerable. They do say obviously having to use a heat gun by hand and kind of eyeball it isn't exactly the ideal approach, but it shows that there's promise here and that it's worth further investigation. I mean, somebody even in the comments said that there's some process where you could put the part in like a bath of salt and then heat that, and then the salt heats it up, and so that you have mechanical. I hadn't heard of that before, but that seems kind of interesting. So there's mechanical stability there. I actually wrote this one up, and I didn't want to include it, but it was already getting kind of long. There's as a secondary hack here to collect the data to see how the vacuum was. They actually used like a camera and OpenCV and wrote a little thing to watch the needle on the pressure gauge, which I thought was kind of a cool aside that, instead of getting some computer connected vacuum pump, they're like, no, we don't need that. We could just point a camera at it and watch where the gauge lays.
Yeah, I love these kind of hacker science projects when they come to light. I know that these kind of hacks are going on all the time in labs everywhere, and it's just so nice to see them when they make it to light and when they get shared with other people in the same field, So I'm really happy to see this. But I do wonder if I could pull the same trick off with PLA, for instance, because I can never make anything even watertight. Like I make boats and they sink. Like, that's not cool. But I wonder if you could use the same technique to do it, and I bet you could.
They do mention that there are, coatings you could put on, different epoxies and that kind of stuff, but the problem with those, they would off-gas, in a vacuum environment, and if you're doing some kind of science, you obviously don't want that in there. Although, like you're saying, if you're just trying to make a boat, maybe it wouldn't be such a big deal for those kind of applications. Fair enough. But yeah, I did the same thing back like when I was first starting with 3D printing. I think I was actually trying to make like a bioreactor for like algae, and I wanted to have a lid that had like integrated, like you put the air hose on the thing and it would like run air through like a printed manifold to like little bubblers, and then when I hooked it up, it just didn't do anything, and I was like, oh, okay. It never occurred to me that these printed parts, can't really hold air; they just leak, from every line, especially with the kind of hardware I was using back then. So it is cool to see that you could do that sort of thing, airtight manifolds and that sort of complex geometry. The problem with this method, of course, is that they're hitting an exposed surface with a heat gun and looking at it. So it's one thing to do that and one thing to seal the entire length of a little pipe or something. So obviously there is a very narrow window in which this particular method can work. But like you said, if you just need like a quick adapter or something, hold your tongue at the right angle, get the heat gun out, and you'll be there.
Speaking of 3D printing, my next hack is a crowned pulley keeps robot treads on track. This is a video from Angus over at Maker's Muse. In a previous episode, he had built an ant weight competition battle bot, and these are very small 150 gram robots that basically, instead of trying to destroy each other, just try to shove each other around, and in particular into a kind of a dropout zone where if you fall in there, you lose. And he made one that harked back to an old bot he made that had some metal on it. When he 3D printed it, he discovered that it was ironically a little bit too light in the front, and it would do wheelies, and he could barely control the thing and just couldn't drive it. So he took this thing out, competed with it, and lost every time. He was not going to be beaten, so he came back and made a better ant-weight robot based on the old Biohazard BattleBot. I don't know if you remember that one. It was kind of a revolution at the time. Back in the early days of BattleBots, everybody was trying to like destroy the other robot, and Biohazard is this like flat wedge with a lifting arm, and instead it tries to get under the other robot and then just flip them over on their back. And it did super well for a couple seasons until people figured out ways to counter it. Anyway, this is his like ant weight version of Biohazard. He goes into a lot of detail about both the lifting arm mechanics, which are kind of interesting, but the thing that Donald Papp really picked up on here was his use of those like for charity silicone wristbands as treads, which is perfect because those things are cheap and sticky. But then to keep it on the axles, he also used kind of custom 3D printed crowned pulleys. And this is one of those things I remember when I learned about crowned pulleys. It was in the context of a bandsaw. You wonder how you can keep a band, or in this case, these silicone wristbands, on a spindle without it sliding either to the left or the right. Those of you who've tuned up a bandsaw, or I guess some of those like belt sanders use this too, at least the good ones do. You crown the pulley. You raise up the inside relative to the outside of a roller. You make it thicker in the middle and thinner on the edges. And you might think that that makes it want to slip off to the side, but it actually does the opposite if the band is at all bendable. It actually stretches it a little bit when it goes over the high part, and that stretch puts a curve in it that then steers it back to center. It's amazing when it works, and of course it works. It's physics. But his demo here is really nice to see. So if you've never seen the crowned pulley trick, give this video a look. And if you're at all interested in small ant weight robots, like battle or otherwise, you should give it a look.
Well, I like that Donald included a little animation of it doing its thing right in the write-up that,
Right?
It's kind of so perfectly demonstrates it, because you're right. At first glance, you're like, well, that belt is mere seconds from slipping off, because it's such a crazy angle, and like at this point half off the pulley, but no, as soon as it starts rolling, it gets perfectly centered. It is really a neat trick. And like you said, the whole article makes me want to work on some little fighting robots,
doesn't it? Yeah.
The wristbands for treads is brilliant, because it's that perfect texture, that rubbery texture. My robot would have what would Jesus do? Little bracelets as the treads.
Flip you over.
But that's so cool. And they're so cheap, and you can pick them up anywhere. I'm trying to think. Have we ever seen these used for something before?
Never.
I feel like it's like an underutilized resource that we should be keeping an eye on. Like, what else can we make out of these little giveaway swag bracelets?
I don't know. Timing belt for a...
Yeah.
I don't know what. But it has to be small. It has to be light.
Well, yeah, very small, yeah. Well, we saw the drawing robot uses the shoestrings instead of
exactly.
a GT2 belt. So I guess if you want to make one of them little like CD-ROM drive 3D printers, maybe use something like that.
Because they're so stretchy, they've got to have a little give in them. I wonder if you...
Yeah.
I could imagine having a situation where you want a little spring in the transmission of force, and you could use them for that.
Absolutely, yeah.
We need to run a Hackaday challenge to see what you can do with these funny silicone wristbands.
Oh, that'd be great. We could have some Hackaday ones made up too. We'll send you the wristbands, awesome. But you got to figure out what to do with them.
Awesome! Oh, that'd be hilarious.
Well, if you've been on any form of social media in the last few months, say Reddit and that kind of thing, you've almost certainly seen these AI-generated images, and we've even done a couple articles where you give them a text prompt and they come up with these sometimes nightmarish pictures. And this article is about one called Midjourney, and specifically a YouTuber by the name of Dara has been feeding it songs, well-known rock songs and stuff, and seeing what it comes up with for the video. And in some cases, it is very, very impressive. It's a very literal take on whatever whatever the words are. It does miss some of the nuance there. You can't deny that it's getting it.
Sure.
It gets the words and it puts it together, and they have these kind of very dreamy look to them. Sometimes very creepy, for sure. But it just kind of show just how far this stuff has come. I think the last time we wrote about it, we even talked about it, I think, on the podcast. It's very it was obviously just like a mashup of stuff it found on Google Images, right? And one it weighted the words differently, so every time we put in what was it, Nixie tube, it would just always be some variant of a Nixie tube, that is baby stuff. This is obviously coming to a next level because the way the images are combined, and it is very, I have to say, beautiful in some cases. I think I was looking at one of the other songs, one of the Queen songs that they have on their YouTube channel, and some of them were like, damn, I could kind of like to see like a print of this. And we kind of get a twofer here because Dave Roundtree wrote this one up, and I guess he has access to a lot of these things are in like beta and closed. You can't just use it willy-nilly, but he must have access to one of these things, and he fed it something to try to create images of all the Hackaday writers, and I gotta tell you, I almost don't want to know which one I am because
I desperately do.
I mean, some of them are recognizably people, and almost like I look at them, I almost kind of get a feel for like who they could be. But then other ones, one of them appears to be like a DNA test, which I don't even know what that's about. And then several of them are just circles. I don't know if I want to be a circle or do I want to be a DNA test? I don't even know.
I want to be the guy in the like hazmat suit or the bee suit. I don't know which it is, but the guy with the visor, I totally want to be him.
Christina had mentioned the guy in the top right looks like a mixture of me and Al, like which like now that I look at it, I can't stop seeing it. He also feeds in some kind of generic, I think wants to do hammer circuit, something like that. And it's abstract. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Dave kind of ends it with, this basically saying like, we aren't the guys to say if this is art or not. We're the computer nerds, but it's certainly very entertaining. Like, is this art is a topic for learned people to debate about, probably for the foreseeable future, because this is only going to become more and more common. But it's wild stuff, and it's cool that more and more of them are coming out there that we can play with, and it's going to be a very exciting next couple years as the software. One, as the software becomes more commonplace, and two, as just hardware becomes more powerful, and we got these artificial intelligence accelerators keep coming out. If you like this stuff, you're going to see a lot more of it. And if you don't like it, I'm sorry. You're going to see a lot more of it.
I wonder what the heck is going on with Midjourney. I would desperately like to see what their training set is and what their algorithm's doing, because it does make these, like, some of them are really beautiful images. But a lot of them, especially in the Stairway to Heaven, are, besides being super literal, they're all very similar. And when you look through it, a whole bunch of them are a background with a person looking into that background from behind. And so there's a million pictures of like women staring off into backgrounds from behind them. And it works really well with the kind of misty watercolor Stairway to Heaven stuff, right? And then the actual literal Stairway to Heavens are pretty funny. And of course, they have the backs of women walking up this Stairway to Heaven because she shows up a lot in the text. It's also got a certain color palette to it. And if you look at the photos of the Hackaday crowd, or those other photos, the other images that it made, it's like got some extreme filter on it as well. And the colors are all like hyper saturated, and it's got blurry things on the edges. They must have put a really interesting training set into this, or it's got a set of source images that it uses as seeds and then mixes with the images. There's definitely some trickery going on here. It is not straight up taking your words and putting them into pictures. It's doing something else that I think was probably picked to give artistic looking results. So I think the people who coded this up are super clever. I think this is not just a straight AI image thing. Like we saw with Stable Diffusion last week, there's some artistry mixed in with the code here that then shows up, and that's the part that I think is really interesting.
Just looking at like the main picture he did for the article, like the sky is beautiful. I mean, the sky looks like from a painting. So I think you like you said, like there must be seed paintings or something. It's not just like it just drops some clouds in the sky. It looks like it said, "What does the sky look like in a proper painting?" And it kind of did that.
Yeah, it looks like they overtrained it on Renoir or Monet or something, or John Singer Sargent or something. I mean, it's really awesome looking.
Yeah, these like Baroque painting looks to them.
Yeah.
And it really works, and like some of the shots are legitimately gorgeous. Like I would try to get a print of some of these things where it like mixes like these weird cyberpunk scenes in with these classic backgrounds. Wild stuff.
The Hackaday people's photos, I'm still really disturbed by the fact that two of the guys look really the same. Like it really looks like there's beard guy and the other guy. I don't know what to describe him. I think that's the one that was you and Al crossed together. And so
the
there's
women
like
look almost identical too.
and the
to
women
me.
look the same too. Yeah, so I think there's something, again, I think there's something going on here, and I don't have my finger on it. I wonder if people wrote up in their descriptions that they had something in their DNA, and that's why we're getting those DNA images in there. Why are we getting things that look like, chromatographs out? That doesn't make any sense. The circles, the
Really plates.
how eyeball circles are awesome. My first quick hack this week is Spikey's testing an inexpensive CNC spindle. Yeah, it depends on what you think of as inexpensive. This is a $1,000 inexpensive CNC spindle. That is inexpensive for a spindle with automatic tool changing. The story here, however, is that the thing was so out of balance when he got it that he had to do some heavy troubleshooting, interesting and heavy troubleshooting, to figure out that it was actually the little spindle collet thing itself that was out of balance. He sent it back, he got a new one. Normally these parts cost like $3,000, so getting it for $1,000 is cheap, and it does show that it pays to be able to do your own quality control and send it back to them when their quality control has failed. Next up, Simon Boak, Arduino Nano powers reverse Polish notation calculator. This is Simon's take on the TI Programmer calculator, which is a really cool looking calculator. It actually displays the results in binary for you. It does logic operations, so it'll do an XOR. If you ever have to set bit masks or whatever, this is the calculator you want. It also works in reverse Polish. He built a particularly nice looking aluminum case for it. But what's a standout is the retrofantabular box that he built for it to make it look like it's an actual product from the past. That attention to detail is superb. And last up, Fisher, if the blade sees its shadow, it's another 64th of accuracy. This is actually a really simple hack to take a chop saw and figure out where the blade's going to go when you line it up with a piece of wood. Some of them have, quote, laser, which are really just red LEDs. They cast a shadow of the blade on the board you're cutting. This one takes it one step further by using actually a simple little LED clip light up in the blade guard, and that means it shines on both sides of the blade, so you can see not just the left side, but also the right side of the cut. You can kind of incorporate your kerf width along on the fly visually. Looks like a super idea if anyone out there has a chop saw.
My first quick hack is the filamenter for when you absolutely want to count every meter used. And this is a really, I almost want to say whimsical kind of mechanical counter that mounts onto the extruder stepper motor I think in this case an Ender 3, but you can modify it. And it just counts the rotations and gives you this really analog display of how much filament you've gone through. And some people in the comments say, hey, my printer already does this in the firmware and whatever, and that's true, but you don't have little spinning digits. It looks so cool when it's going, like an old school odometer. I'd like to see it get maybe adapted to other printers. It's the nature of putting your design out there. I'm sure somebody will create some spin-off for other extruders. Next up is ultra-thin rubber parts made with a 3D printed plug. This one comes from Engineerable. And the idea here is that, we have rubbery filaments like TPU that you can print, but you can't get real thin, unless you just want to do a 2D gasket or something. So the approach is to use a water-soluble filament, print your plug, and then spray it with Plastidip until you build up a coating on there, and then the whole thing goes into, in this case, an ultrasonic cleaner to break up the soluble part, and what you're left with is the outer rubbery layer. He shows 0.1 millimeter thickness, which is pretty thin. It's pretty thin for any kind of part, but it's still very rugged. He can stretch it, he can manipulate it, and it goes back to its original shape. I don't know what the application for this is, but that's not our department. We just show you the cool techniques. If you ever needed to make something super thin, rubbery, and strong, this is the one for you. Last up is the Calico Wearable Rides the Rails, and this comes from the University of Maryland. And, it's one of these ones you should probably just hop over to the site and see the picture of, but I'll try to describe it. Imagine if you had a train track running all over your body, and there was a little robot that zipped on along it to position itself wherever it would most benefit you at the time. Maybe if you want it to, check your heart rate, it zips over your heart. If you want it to be a watch, it goes down your arm and sits on your wrist. It is simultaneously one of the most cyberpunk things I've ever seen and one of the most preposterous ideas. But, hey, who knows? Even if this particular application never catches on, I mean, the research done here on the little tracks and how they connect to each other could certainly be applied to some other less ridiculous pursuit.
That brings us to our Can't Miss articles. These are long-form original content pieces written by our fantastic Hackaday writing staff. This week I picked Al Williams's Floppy Disk Sings I'm Big in Japan. Now, Al claimed that nobody out there got that title. This one started off with an article about how the Japanese Minister of Technology was going to stop people from sending in floppy disks anymore to submit their tax forms. But this turned into Al taking off on a rant about why it is that you might still, in 2022, be sending tax forms in on a floppy disk. How crazy is that? But we've all had to send faxes, even in this modern era. It's not really all that far-fetched. And he also mentions that, if you've opened up a bank account or something, you've almost certainly had to put a signature on a piece of paper. In this modern era, how weird is that? Don't we have electronic signatures that are even easier and more secure to verify? And the answer is, of course we do. That technology is out there, like HMAC signing. There's all this public key infrastructure. Some of this stuff is really, truly bulletproof too, like digital certificates that are more secure than their original analog counterpart by far. And his point is that one reason these things are slow to adapt is that governments are slow in adapting. You may have to send a fax. We had to send a fax to get our garbage can cleaned. We have these big plastic garbage cans, and the city will clean them for you. We had to send a fax in to get it cleaned. What's up with the fax? So some of it is governments are big, slow-moving, they have systems. But then at the very end of the article, he kind of turns it around on us and says, what would happen to you if you sent an encrypted email to most of your friends? Not your geek friends, but your normal friends. Would they be able to open it? And of course, the answer is no. People are just as bad as government institutions here. We could all be sending each other encrypted email, and we're not. So I like his basic point here because there's some kind of general reluctance to incorporate cryptography tech, and we're still relying on stacks of paper that are filed away somewhere with somebody's signature on it as proof of something. That's a really interesting thought piece, I think.
Well, you're just reminding me about, the encrypted email. I remember there was a time where 2600 had to post a thing that said, please stop sending us encrypted articles, because more often than not, we have a lot of trouble decrypting them, and then they have to email them back and be like, well, what did you use? I can't figure out how to do it. So, if these people, if hackers and the Hacker magazine, if they can't get it working,
Yeah,
what is the chances
right?
of your mom being able to figure it out? And the other thing was like, hey, you're going to publish it in a magazine and everyone's going to see it, so maybe it doesn't need to be encrypted in the first place. Like there was kind of a question like, why are you sending me an encrypted thing for me to then print on paper and put in the Barnes and Noble? But whatever. It wouldn't be an owl write up without a story from his past, and I like where he has the thing where they want to do a digital signature wherever agency he was working at the time, and he was like, well, how does it authenticate? And they couldn't answer it, and basically paints him into a corner because he somehow signs an email with one of the higher ups signatures, and they had to cancel the whole program. And if anyone else told the story, I might doubt it, but because it's Al, I have no question in my mind that this really happened, and in fact, everyone did clap at the end.
Yeah, it's really hard. And this is one of those things that I've always wondered why, in particular, encrypted email isn't widely spread. And I've got a conspiracy theory for you, and that is that if you're using Gmail, Google makes money by reading your emails, right?
Ooh,
like Google uses the content of your emails to know what you buy and what you're interested in. So they have a strong interest in making sure that you don't encrypt your emails, because then they wouldn't be able to read them.
I wouldn't even limit it to Google anymore. I would say pretty much whoever is giving you free email is probably reading your email, whether it's Microsoft or Yahoo or whoever. Like, it's what's the thing they say? If it's free, then you're the product, right? Like, if they're letting you send this email for free, someone is reading it other than the intended recipient.
But I do, if I take a step back from my over cynicism, if I take a step back from being too cynical, I will say that the tech is complicated, and I don't know of any email readers that make like pulling in someone's PGP signature and verifying their email very easy. I do it. I'm cool to do it, but I use Mutt, and like that's crazy. Nobody uses text-based email anymore, and to set it up was not trivial either. So I understand the problem is real, and it's not something that like I would get my mom to be sending encrypted email, but that's just because the software side hasn't been developed, and that's because maybe nobody has an interest in developing it.
Yeah, I mean, it works, right? It works.
Yeah, right? But
And I should say, to go back to the original like basis for the story, it does clarify that it was like floppy or CD-ROM for most of these things.
oh, cool.
So
I can
like,
just burn a CD-ROM and send
so you
it.
could burn a disc. So obviously, the funny headline is they banned floppy disks, and we got the Awesome Joe art of this almighty floppy disk. But I don't think anything was actually requiring a floppy. They just wanted some kind of physical media, and you got to figure anybody in the last decade would have just been burning them a disc. But in an era where even the new laptops and stuff don't come with optical drives. I mean, that's only slightly less archaic, I suppose, than a 3.5-inch floppy. Like I'm fairly confident my 12-year-old daughter has never burned a CD and could figure out how to do it.
I'll have you know, I have an archive of the Hackaday podcast on burnt
On CD?
to CD-ROM. I can send it to you if you want.
How many episodes could you get on a disc?
About 10.
10, so quite a few. We can do DVDs though.
I'll send you my entire collection. No, but you say that, but it's like 20 CDs now stacked up in my closet.
You probably couldn't get all of them on DVD at this point, right? What's a DVD? 4.5?
Yeah, probably not.
That'd be a cool thing for the swag bag at SuperCon, though. A disc with all the podcast episodes on it.
Ooh.
As many as we can fit, anyway.
I'll copy some of my CDs and we'll give them out. I'll give you
right.
Hackaday Podcast, episodes 130 through 139.
Well, my can't miss this week is from Maya, and it is Frank Drake's Legacy. Or Are We All Alone in the Universe? And, of course, this one was sort of inspired by the death of Frank Drake. And, it's kind of a shame because I wanted to write something about, Drake's equation for a while now. It is also one of the things that was kind of always on the back burner, and it's a bittersweet to see like this is how we finally get like a new article about it. But it's part kind of just a story of his life and the kind of things that he was into, and of course the Drake equation itself, which I should probably explain if you're not familiar with, which is essentially a mathematical formula for determining how likely or how many civilizations within our galaxy we could potentially communicate with. And like the variables here are, how many stars there are, how many of those stars have planets, how many of those planets could theoretically support life as we know it. And you kind of boop, 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 boop. And all these variables, it's long, 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 long. And the last bit is, your number. Right now we know the number to be 1, right? Because there's one of us. But it seems, and Carl Sagan talked about this like in Cosmos. It was probably where most people would have heard about it. Once you add up all these variables, it becomes increasingly unlikely that the answer is 1, right? Because there's so many stars and there's so many planets and so much time has passed and all that kind of stuff. And even modern variations maybe of the Drake equation, take into account all the exoplanets that we found. When he came up with this, an exoplanet was something they knew about. Like, of course there's planets out there. Look at all the stars. Of course they have planets. But there wasn't like a hard number. And now from like the Kepler program and all this stuff, we actually are getting hard numbers on exoplanets. And surprise, surprise, there are a lot of them. And some of them are even in the star's habitable zone, and they have potentially liquid water on them and stuff. So you start putting these variables in there, and the Drake equation starts looking very, very nice for, there being somebody else that we can, if not visit in person because we don't have the technology, we can at least, fire some signals at them. And then, Maya kind of goes into that too and talks about, of course, the WOW signal, from back in the day where they thought that was from another star system. And then, our efforts to put the little plaques on Pioneer and Voyager and send them all out. And she kind of uses this as a good opportunity to just remind people that, maybe in an overly hopeful way, but we're trying. We're trying to reach out and touch somebody. And it hasn't happened yet, but there are people who are, this is what their whole lives have been devoted to. I'd like to think it's only a matter of time. I'd love to be around when the Drake equation finally has a number higher than 1.
It's really fun because there are so many billions of galaxies with billions of suns out there, right? Like, that there has to be other life. But then the kind of paradox of the Drake equation is then it's like, well, yeah, but they have to, that star has to have planets. The planets have to be in the right zone. This all has to be close enough that they could reach us. Only some of them are going to develop intelligent life, probably, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you multiply all these small numbers together, and it can cancel out even the hugest numbers of how many stars are out there can get, knocked down to how many stars will have planets that will have intelligent life on them that will ever be able to contact, at light speed. And then it gets really small again. And so it's kind of bizarre because it's this unimaginably big number times basically 1 over this other unimaginably big number. And it's supposed to collapse to something that's like, a normal how many fingers I've got number. Like 1 or 10 or something. And that's just amazing. To me, the most interesting part of the Drake equation is this last term, this L, which is the length of time during which these detectable signals will have been emitted. And this really struck me when I was talking to my son about dinosaurs, right? Because dinosaurs, they were the kings for, 150, 300 million years. And humans have been the kings for, 100,000? And we've been able to make space transmissions for 100? I mean, not very long in comparison. One of these tiny, tiny fractions that you have to multiply by when you're doing the Drake equation. I don't know that it is a paradox. I think everybody who says that it's a paradox doesn't realize how sensitive it is to each one of those numbers in there. Where if it's like factor of 2 off, and all of them are just made up. Although that exoplanet search, we're starting to hammer down on some of them, so maybe it isn't.
Yeah, like I remember when Carl Sagan, he just had a guess. He was presumably there's someone, because
Drake equation is wild ass guess from beginning to end, but actually some of them you can start to narrow down. Yeah,
right. We have a real number.
Yeah.
And cool, the number is big.
Yeah.
There's a hell of a lot of exoplanets, way more than I think, they even would have guessed. I'd actually like to go back. I couldn't find anywhere to stream it. I might actually have to buy it on DVD or something. I know when they re-released Cosmos in in the 90s or early 2000s, Carl actually did like a new ending segment.
Cool.
Now much older, and he kind of, he would do like corrections and stuff, and he would even say like, you gotta understand, when I did this back then, we didn't know XYZ. Now we know this, and he actually did one it was, I think they did like the doomsday clock, you know, where X amount of minutes from blowing ourselves up. I remember watching it. He comes on at the end of that one and he was like, well, obviously I was wrong. And we did not blow ourselves up. And I can't tell you how happy I am that cooler heads prevailed and the Cold War ended. And we have this, you know, at the time, you know, I think he probably was talking about the ISS and stuff and how it seemed like everybody was working together. So it was cool to see his, like, and this is probably right before he died too, where he had these like little snippets, you know. But I think that even that, I think, predates our discovery of the exoplanets, because that's really, I think we were just talking about before, that's super recent, you know. Kepler was only, you know, 2010s maybe they launched it.
Yeah.
In
No,
the grand scheme of things.
Yeah,
that's nothing.
last 15, 20 years, period. That's it for this week's Hackaday podcast. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to leave a comment or check out our links, head on over to the webpage hackaday.com/podcast. If you've got any great tips, send them to tips@hackaday.com. And until next week,
Keep on hacking.
do you want to just start this one?
Nope. Don't like that. Don't like that. Look at these pictures and smell these fumes. Man, I don't know what's what right now. Holy Christ.
If you'd like to leave I'm going to think about what I'm going to say before I say it. If you'd like
You know, it's a good story when 5 wasps is the happy ending.